Hi, it's Dan, and welcome to Sky Pilot Faith Quest Podcast, the video version. If you're new, welcome. If you're not new and you've been here before, well, welcome back. I want to start in a very strange way today, and that is I want to say, stop. Just stop. I'm going to tell you right now that you might want to turn this off. You're probably actually better turning it off, come to think of it. This is not for everyone. If you want your faith, your language, your beliefs to go unchallenged, if you want me to stay in my lane and not make comments about instances where, I believe the church got things wrong, well, here's your exit ramp. As much as I'm glad you found your way here, and I hope you'll come back, it's probably time to leave, because from here on in, it's going to be a bumpy ride. And that will be while we're answering the question, did Mary exist? Welcome to the Sky Pilot Podcast that explores questions of faith, spirituality, and religion. I'm Dan Matthews, and I don't have all the answers, but I do enjoy the questions. Welcome to the podcast where every question is an invitation into a spiritual quest, and you're invited along for the journey. Okay, before we get started, let me remind you to like the video, subscribe if you haven't done that yet. Oh, and be sure to ring the bell. Ringing the bell is really important. Really important. How important? Well, I'm glad you asked. Well, let me just show you this.
Look, Daddy, teacher says every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings.
That's right. That's right.
Now, I can't even count the number of times I've heard it or seen it. Something along the lines of, join us today as we attempt to peer through 2,000 years of historical myth, pull away traditions and legends that grew up on their own, and ultimately go in search of the historical Jesus. Countless articles, videos, television series have been created teasing exactly this end product. And it must be a popular topic, as I said, because I've seen so many offerings with this promise. Shoot, it seems like every 5 or 6 months I go into the grocery store, and while I'm waiting in line and checkout line, there's a special edition magazine promising to reveal the real historical Jesus. I mean, Time magazine has featured Jesus 21 times, and I don't mean in articles, but 21 times on the cover. National Geographic seems to be the one that's constantly putting out special editions. I've lost track of all the National Geographic covers in this topical vein. And in some sense, it's fair. There are lots of ways in which we have formed Jesus into who we want him to be rather than, well, who he actually was. Because of the research I do for this podcast, I'm frequently online, browsing, reading, discovering wide ranges of beliefs. And in this case, I'm talking about Christian beliefs. And there are lots of variants of the that wasn't, isn't, shouldn't be associated with Jesus stuff. You know, things that have no basis in Scripture. Like, you can buy a phone case with Karate Jesus on the case. Or there was an advertisement of Jesus encouraging you to buy a Samsung phone. As if, pretty sure Jesus is an Apple guy anyway. I mean, the word Apple appears in the Bible like 10 or 11 times. And let me ask you this. How many times does Samsung or Nokia appear in the Bible? That's right.
That was snarky sarcasm on the part of our host. Please don't take it literally.
Back on track. Another example of the same thing would be like Jesus draped in the flag, the American flag, and carrying an assault rifle, sometimes riding a horse, a white one, of course. I can't even count the number of times I've seen a variant of this one. By the way, just quick question, is this a thing in other countries or for other faiths? I mean, do the people from, say, the Maldives love an AI-generated picture of Muhammad where he looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger and is draped in the Maldorific, the flag of the Maldives? Do they like that as much as some of the people in the U.S. who like that sort of thing? Obviously, this kind of thing has nothing to do in Christianity with Jesus. This is a political fantasy, and it's an intersection of make-believe, religion, Well, I'm politics, and it's nothing more than pornography. Yeah, no, seriously, I use that word very intentionally and specifically. It's something designed to titillate, to excite, but not in any way based in reality. See, that's pretty much the definition of pornography. It wasn't long ago that someone asked me a question about Jesus. The person was not a person of faith, and so was asking really a basic non-faith question that I answered. Not from a faith perspective, but from an answer that I promise any historian, maybe most historians, would agree with. But when I said something about Jesus being a historical figure towards the end, the person replied, "Well, I guess we all have our own version of history then, don't we?" I realized that they assumed that if they didn't agree with my beliefs and what I understood Jesus to be, then they couldn't agree with my statement that he was, that he actually existed. The truth is, there are elements of the historical Jesus that really aren't debated anywhere. Here are historical facts that most objective, non-religious historians would agree with, and there's not going to be anything here you're going to find surprising. It's just making a point. Jesus really lived, and really lived in the era and the location that we understand him to have lived. He was a teacher, and he was a preacher who gained a following. He had some conflict with religious authorities of his time. He was executed by the Roman authorities. People who followed him believed him to be a miracle worker, and there are even historical references to Jesus outside of the Bible in secular historical documents. Thallus and Josephus being the authors of two of those. Now, why do I make this point? Because despite all of our search for the historical Jesus, I would argue that we are much closer to knowing the historical Jesus than we are to knowing the historical Mary. So let's talk about who Mary is as far as the church has been concerned down through the ages. Look, these points I'm about to make, I reference, are from particular segments of the Christian faith. So this isn't stuff I'm making up. And let me start with the 4 classic dogmas about Mary. And some will listen to these and immediately say to themselves, well, those are just from the Catholic Church. Well, these certainly, some of them are held to be true as official beliefs within the Catholic Church. But also, there are elements within the Orthodox Church that believe this, and even some of the original voices of the Protestant Reformation, names you will know, like Luther, Calvin, and Wycliffe, they agree with portions of these as well. So there are 4 Marian dogmas, and let me just work my way through them here. Number 1 is focused on the divine motherhood of Mary. The Council of Ephesus in 431 called Mary, gave her the name of Theotokos, which is a Greek word meaning bearer of God. Now, without getting lost in the theological weeds here, there were those who felt that it would taint the divinity of Jesus to be carried in the womb by a mere human. So the thinking went, in order to solve this problem, the divinity of the Christ child perhaps joined Jesus after his birth. Now, the Council of Ephesus said, yeah, we've considered that. No, we don't agree with that. Jesus was born with both his divine nature and his human nature. That means Mary carried both natures within her. So she was given the name Theotokos, bearer of God. Now, this should be the high point for Mary, right? But the truth is, I believe that it caused so many problems for us down the road. Interestingly, the moment we, the church, agreed to this first belief about Mary, it gave birth to a series of other beliefs. So the second of the doctrines about Mary is that Mary was perpetually a virgin. Wait, I can hear you say, that's just the Catholics again. Well, actually, some of the major voices, again, of the Reformation believe this to be true, including Calvin, Luther, Zwingli, just to name a few. I know you may be aware that we talk about the virgin birth of Christ, and in my opinion, that may be the biggest problem we have as Christians with the birth of Jesus. When the early church told the story of the virgin birth of Jesus, it was very likely that they were far more amazed that God was born of a human woman, that the secondary detail That the woman was a virgin when it happened, well, that was far less interesting for them. For God to be born of a woman, again, a human, was an absolutely amazing and revolutionary idea. Yeah, the Greek gods did this kind of thing, but this particular God, the God they worshiped, had never done anything like this before. Unfortunately, instead of becoming a church focused on the incarnational nature of the birth story, it seems like at times we became obsessed with whether or not Mary had an intimate relationship with her husband beforehand. And then there was a decision that if Mary was a virgin before, well then, she had to remain a virgin forever after. So one of the doctrines about Mary is that she wasn't just a virgin when Jesus was conceived, but that she remained one for the rest of her life. Which is amazing because the Bible mentions pretty clearly that Jesus had brothers. Matthew 13:55. Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not this his mother called Mary? And are not his brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? Now I am aware that those who argue that she was perpetually a virgin will say this particular passage wasn't talking about his brothers, but was really referring to other family members, like brothers. That just seems unlikely to me. The passage here seems pretty clear. It is naming his immediate family, his mother and his brothers. But if Mary was the mother of God, then she needed to remain pure and untainted by sex. So parts of the church have often argued that she remained a virgin. Always. But wait, there's more. The third of the beliefs about Mary is referred to as the Immaculate Conception. Now, I can hear also you saying, wait, is this one going to be about sex too? You're catching on, aren't you? This one is frequently misunderstood, though. We are so obsessed with how Jesus was conceived. People often think the Immaculate Conception is in reference to the conception of Jesus, but it isn't. It's referring to the conception of Mary herself. If Mary, the thinking goes, was to give birth to the living, breathing, walking incarnation of God, then she couldn't come into this world in the regular way herself. So the thinking went that she was certainly immaculately conceived. Again, so the theory goes that this didn't mean her mother was a virgin, but when Mary was conceived by her mother, the act was done without sin. Now, the importance of this was that she would have been brought into this world without the tainting of original sin, which evidently is associated with sex for absolutely every other single sexual act in the history of humanity. And the defense of this is that God and sin are incompatible, and sex and sin are, except in this one case, inseparable. So Mary had to be sinless in order to carry Jesus, the God-child. Notice that sinlessness and sexlessness seem to be closely associated for much of the history of the church. Doctrine number 4, the fourth doctrine of Mary, is that of her assumption. Mary did not die and go to heaven like everybody else, but she was assumed into heaven. Now, you hear that and you go, oh, like Jesus after his resurrection. That would be a natural thing to think. You would think so, but those who espouse this belief draw a distinction. The primary distinction is that the ascension of Jesus was done by his own power, and the assumption of Mary differed in that it took the power of God to achieve and was not done on her own. Now, just as kind of another way of thinking about this as an aside, imagine that a young woman visits a high-rise to go to a meeting on the top floor. At the same time that she is climbing onto the elevator to ride to the top, the owner, the builder of the building, is on the other elevator going to the same floor. One of them owns the elevator and built it. The other, the woman, does not. But I would argue that the elevator ride is essentially the same. The same forces are at work in both rides. Look, one of my chief complaints is that we have robbed Mary of her humanity. She didn't come into this world like anyone else. She didn't conceive her child like anybody else. She didn't get to experience marriage like anybody else. She wasn't even allowed to leave the world like everyone else. So back to the question, did Mary exist? Well, this question can be answered in two ways. First, was there an honest-to-goodness woman named Mary who was the mother of Jesus and married to a man named Joseph? Well, yes. Then the answer to that question is yes. But in my opinion, the more important question, is Mary, who we have created and put into a sealed, unbreakable crystal container, never to be touched by true life or existence, is she real? No, she's not. At least I would argue she is not real. Now, you may want to ask at this point, okay then, Dan, what should we do? Well, let me say this. If I could remove one word from our description of Mary, it would be the word virgin. Now, I'm not arguing against the doctrine of the virgin birth. It isn't particularly important to me. If Jesus came back tomorrow and said, yeah, that virgin thing was totally your creation of humanity's, not God's, my faith would not change. If Jesus said it was true, fine. If Jesus said it was not true, also fine. It just isn't foundational to my faith. What bothers me is not the doctrine as much as the use of the word and our obsession revolving around it. We have become way too focused on the virginity of this woman. We have become way too convinced that it was the lack of sex that made the birth of Jesus special, and also that made, therefore, Mary special. And that just isn't the case. And it seems to have the effect of putting Mary on this bizarre and unlikely pedestal in which she bears little to no resemblance to the human woman, the real human woman who we have to know she must have been. What I'm arguing against is our propensity to never let the woman's name be spoken without the word virgin being attached to it, either through spoken word or at least mentally. Let's just think of her as Mary. Wouldn't it be much more interesting if we set Mary free to be who she actually was, an honest-to-goodness woman who lived a remarkable life? Now, we may never actually be able to discover the details of her historic existence. But let's allow her out of her perpetually sealed container we have put her in and let her be the mother of Jesus, who lived a remarkable and noteworthy life without all this other stuff we have limited her by and confined her with. And that's all for today. Let me know if you agree. Do you agree that we have turned Mary into something that she surely was not in real life? Or perhaps you think I have missed the mark on this one and the church is better served by the Mary we've all grown up hearing about. Or perhaps you have a third option I haven't even mentioned. I would love to hear from you. Leave your comments in the comment section below. As always, I would love to hear from you. And on your spiritual journey, may you ask questions, seek answers, and boldly go wherever the quest takes you. Thanks for joining us here today and being part of the SkyPilot Faith Quest community. This is a great place to ask questions you wouldn't feel comfortable or safe asking in other places. And remember, the sign of a strong faith, solid religion, or healthy spiritual journey is not certainty, but that you keep asking questions.